Have you ever felt like something was preventing your life from prospering? That doors were closing without explanation, that the envy of others seemed to weigh on your shoulders, or that spiritual bindings were blocking your blessings? If you answered yes to any of these questions, know that you are not alone. Thousands of people around the world face daily spiritual battles that are invisible to the human eye but very real in their consequences. Psalm 35 is considered one of the most powerful texts in the Bible for breaking spells, undoing bindings, and protecting against envious eyes. Written by King David in a moment of great distress, when he was being persecuted by enemies who plotted against his life, this psalm carries an extraordinary spiritual force that has transcended millennia and continues to transform lives to this day. The story of David and the context of Psalm 35 are fascinating and revealing. Imagine a young shepherd anointed to be king, yet forced to flee and hide in caves because King Saul, consumed by jealousy and envy, wanted to kill him. David had no armies, no political power, no wealth. What he had was faith and knowledge of the power of prayer. It was in this context of unjust persecution, of people plotting against him without reason, of envy and gratuitous malice, that David wrote this powerful psalm. The text of Psalm 35 begins with a direct cry, "Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me, fight against those who fight against me." These words are not mere poetry, they are a declaration of spiritual warfare. David is asking God to enter the battle on his behalf, to fight his fights, to face his enemies. And here lies a fundamental principle. When you are facing spiritual bindings, curses, or envious eyes, you don't have to fight alone. You can call upon divine power to fight for you. Throughout history, many people have reported extraordinary experiences while reciting Psalm 35. One such story involves a woman named Maria, who lived in a small town in the countryside. Maria owned a successful sewing business, but suddenly everything began to go wrong. Machines broke for no reason, clients canceled orders at the last minute, and she began having terrible nightmares. A neighbor who practiced black magic and envied Maria's success, had cast spiritual works against her. Desperate, Maria sought spiritual help, and an elderly woman taught her to pray Psalm 35 every day, morning and night for 40 days. At first, nothing seemed to change. But Maria persisted. In the second week, she dreamed of chains breaking. In the third week, her business began to improve. By the end of the 40 days, the envious neighbor had moved away, and Maria's life flourished like never before. Coincidence? Maria doesn't believe so. For her, Psalm 35 broke the bindings that were blocking her prosperity. Another remarkable story is that of João, a businessman on the brink of bankruptcy. Without understanding why, his business collapsed. He did everything right, worked hard, but it was as if an invisible force was preventing his success. A friend told him about the power of Psalm 35 against envious eyes. João discovered that a former business partner, who had been dismissed for dishonest practices, was performing spiritual works against him out of jealousy and revenge. João began to recite Psalm 35 with faith and determination. He didn't just read the words, he meditated on each verse, internalizing the power of every phrase. Within weeks, contracts that seemed lost were reinstated, new clients appeared out of nowhere, and the ex-partner was exposed in his wrongdoings, disappearing from João's life. His company not only recovered but prospered beyond his previous expectations. Psalm 35 contains specific verses considered especially powerful against curses and bindings. When David says, "Take up shield and armor, arise and come to my aid," he uses military language to describe a spiritual reality. God becomes your shield, your protection against invisible attacks. How many times have you felt attacked in ways you couldn't explain? This verse declares that divine protection is available to you. One of the most controversial and powerful aspects of this psalm are the verses asking that confusion and shame fall upon those who plot evil against you. May those who seek my life be disgraced and put to shame. May those who plot my ruin be turned back in dismay. To many, these words may seem harsh, even vengeful. But it's important to understand the context. It's not about personal revenge but divine justice. When someone uses spells, bindings, or envy to harm another person, they are violating spiritual laws. The psalm calls for those violations to be corrected, for justice to be established. There are fascinating accounts of people who, while praying Psalm 35, saw their spiritual enemies exposed or retreat from their attacks. One particularly striking story comes from a rural community where several families were being harmed by someone practicing black magic. Crops failed, animals died without explanation, and children fell ill. A group of people began gathering to pray Psalm 35 together every morning at dawn. For weeks, nothing seemed to happen. But then, unexpectedly, the person performing the spiritual works fell gravely ill. It wasn't a common illness but a condition that doctors couldn't diagnose. She weakened day by day until, desperate, she confessed what she had done and asked the community for forgiveness. From the moment she stopped her evil practices and genuinely repented, her health began to improve, and the community returned to prosperity. The residents attribute this transformation to the power of Psalm 35. But how exactly does Psalm 35 work against spells and bindings? To understand this, we need to grasp the nature of spiritual bindings. A binding is a kind of energetic or spiritual blockage placed upon a person, usually through rituals or by the force of envy and the evil eye. These bindings can affect different areas of life: relationships, finances, health, career. It's as if invisible ropes were preventing a person from moving forward, prospering, or being happy. When recited with genuine faith, Psalm 35 works as a spiritual sword that cuts through those ropes. The words of the psalm are not merely sounds or symbols. They carry a spiritual frequency, a power that was activated by David's faith and by the authority of the Holy Scriptures. When you recite this psalm, you are invoking that same power. You are activating spiritual forces that work in your favor. A young woman named Anna shared her touching experience with Psalm 35. She was in an abusive relationship and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break free. It was as if something bound her to that destructive situation. A spiritual therapist identified that there was a love binding placed on her, probably by her partner who wanted to keep her trapped. The therapist taught Anna to recite Psalm 35 daily, focusing specifically on the verses about deliverance. Anna reported that in the first few days she felt immense resistance. It was hard to concentrate, the words seemed meaningless, and she felt sleepy or distracted every time she tried to pray. This is common when there are strong bindings because negative forces resist being broken. But Anna persisted. She wrote the psalm by hand, placed copies of it around her home, and recited it even when she didn't feel like it. After 3 weeks, something changed. She felt as if a fog had lifted from her mind. For the first time in years, she could clearly see the toxicity of the relationship and found the strength to free herself. Today, she credits her freedom to the power of Psalm 35. The power of Psalm 35 against envious eyes is particularly remarkable. The evil eye, as it's popularly known, is a form of negative energy directed towards someone through envy. It may not be intentional, but the effect is real. When someone looks at your happiness, success, beauty, or achievements with intense envy, that energy can create blockages in your life. You might start experiencing inexplicable bad luck, sudden health issues, or a general feeling of heaviness and negativity. One documented case involves a rising actress who, after appearing on a popular TV show, began to experience strange problems. Her once perfect skin developed severe issues. She started stuttering during auditions, something that had never happened before. Opportunities that seemed certain would fall apart at the last minute. A spiritual advisor identified that she was under attack from envious eyes, probably from colleagues jealous of her sudden success. The actress began a protection ritual that included reciting Psalm 35 every morning before getting out of bed, and every night before sleeping. She also performed a spiritual cleansing of her home, removing gifts from people she suspected might envy her. Within weeks, the problems began to resolve. Her skin improved, her confidence returned, and opportunities began to reappear. To this day, she continues to recite Psalm 35 as a constant protection practice. It's important to mention that Psalm 35 is not a magical formula that works without effort or faith. Faith is the fuel that activates the power of sacred words. When David wrote this psalm, he wasn't merely repeating empty words. He was placing all his trust in God, all his hope in divine justice. Likewise, when you recite this psalm, you must do so with conviction, with an open heart, with a genuine expectation that something will change. There is a specific way to enhance the power of Psalm 35 that has been passed down through generations. First, you should perform a spiritual cleansing of yourself. This may include a bath with purifying herbs, a prayer for cleansing, or simply a moment of reflection where you disconnect from negative energies. Second, prepare a quiet space where you will not be interrupted. Light a white candle, symbolizing purity and spiritual light. Third, read the psalm aloud, calmly and intentionally, visualizing chains breaking, shields of light surrounding you, and your spiritual enemies retreating. A particularly powerful story comes from a businessman who was being sabotaged by a competitor using black magic to harm him. This man, let's call him Carlos, began to experience strange accidents. His car broke down 3 times in a month, always before important meetings. He fell and broke his arm under bizarre circumstances. Major contracts were lost due to inexplicable mistakes by his team. Carlos was skeptical about spiritual matters, but his wife, who had knowledge of spiritual protection, convinced him to try Psalm 35. She prepared a ritual. For 9 consecutive days at noon, Carlos had to stop everything he was doing and recite Psalm 35 3 times, asking for protection and the breaking of any spiritual work against him. At first, Carlos did it mechanically without real conviction. But on the 5th day something changed. During the recitation he felt a physical sensation of warmth and tingling, as if something was moving around him. Part superior du formulario. From that day on, the accidents stopped. More than that, the competitor who had been harming him began to face serious problems in his own business. Suppliers refused to work with him, employees started quitting, and he faced legal action for unethical practices. Carlos did not feel joy in the other man's suffering, but he recognized that he was witnessing divine justice in action, exactly as Psalm 35 asks, that those who plot evil may be confounded and driven back. Psalm 35 also contains an element of praise and thanksgiving that is often forgotten but is crucial to its power. After asking for protection and justice, David says, "And my soul shall be joyful in the Lord, it shall rejoice in his salvation." This is a powerful spiritual principle, to give thanks for victory before it manifests physically. It is an act of faith that declares you have already received what you asked for, even if you cannot yet see it with your physical eyes. There is a traditional practice of reciting Psalm 35 not only when you are under attack but also as a preventive form of protection. Many people make it part of their daily spiritual routine, reciting it every morning as a way to shield themselves from any negative energy they might encounter during the day. It's like putting on spiritual armor before stepping out into the world. A teacher shared that she began reciting Psalm 35 every day after realizing that she always came home emotionally exhausted, absorbing the negative energies of students, colleagues, and parents. After incorporating this psalm into her morning routine, she noticed a dramatic difference. The same stressful situations continued to occur, but they no longer affected her the same way. It was as if she were surrounded by a protective bubble that prevented the negative energies from penetrating her. Another fascinating aspect of Psalm 35 is its use in situations of legal or professional injustice. David prays, "Let not those who are my enemies wrongfully rejoice over me, neither let them wink with the eye that hate me without a cause." This verse is particularly powerful for those facing unjust lawsuits, workplace persecution, or situations where others are plotting to bring them down. A lawyer once shared that he used Psalm 35 during an extremely difficult case. His client was clearly innocent, but the opposing side had fabricated evidence and bribed witnesses. The lawyer felt he was fighting not just a legal battle but a spiritual one. Every night before sleeping and every morning before going to court, he recited Psalm 35, asking that the truth be revealed and the schemes of his adversaries be undone. On the day of the final hearing, an unexpected witness appeared and exposed the entire plot, revealing the lies and corruption. His client was acquitted, and those who had conspired against him faced legal consequences. The lawyer is convinced that Psalm 35 was instrumental in that victory. It is also important to talk about the power of Psalm 35 against self-sabotage. Not all curses or bindings come from external sources. Sometimes our own negative thoughts, limiting beliefs, and self-destructive patterns act as bindings we place on ourselves. Psalm 35 can be used to break these internal chains, those patterns that prevent us from prospering. A woman who struggled with chronic depression and suicidal thoughts found in Psalm 35 a powerful tool for liberation. She had tried therapy, medication, and various spiritual approaches with no lasting success. When she began reciting Psalm 35, focusing especially on the verses about deliverance and joy, something within her began to change. She realized she was at war with herself, that her own thoughts were like internal enemies that needed to be fought. The psalm helped her externalize this battle, to see it as something she could overcome with divine help, rather than as an inherent part of who she was. Psalm 35 is also known for its power to reverse spiritual works. There is a belief, found in many spiritual traditions, that when you sincerely pray for protection and justice, any work done against you can be returned to the sender. The verses, "Let their way be dark and slippery, and let the angel of the Lord persecute them," are interpreted as a request that those who send negativity receive back their own energy. An interesting case involved two sisters in conflict over an inheritance. One of them hired someone to perform spiritual work against the other, trying to make her confused and accept an unfair division. The sister who was attacked began to suffer from terrible headaches, mental confusion, and an inability to make decisions. A spiritual leader advised her to recite Psalm 35 7 times a day for a week, asking that any work done against her be returned to its source. Within a few days, the sister who had ordered the spiritual work began experiencing the same symptoms, only worse. She became so desperate that she confessed what she had done and asked for forgiveness. The two sisters were able to reconcile, and the one who had plotted evil sought spiritual help to free herself from the consequences of her own actions. This case illustrates an important spiritual principle. What you send into the universe returns to you, and Psalm 35 can accelerate that return when it is used against you unjustly. There are also specific guidelines on when and how to recite Psalm 35 for maximum effectiveness. Traditionally, the most powerful times are at dawn, when the sun is rising and energies are being renewed, and at midnight, when the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds is thinnest. Some traditions recommend reciting the psalm during the waning moon, when the focus is on removing, banishing, and breaking negative influences. To break specific bindings, especially love bindings, there is a traditional ritual. For 9 consecutive days, light a white candle, write your name on a piece of paper, place it under the candle, and recite Psalm 35 3 times. Visualize the chains that bind you breaking apart, see yourself free and walking toward a life of prosperity and peace. On the 9th day, burn the paper in the flame of the candle, symbolizing the complete destruction of the binding. Part inferior do formulario. A moving story comes from a man who had been trapped in addiction for more than 20 years. He had tried countless times to free himself from drugs, but he always relapsed. One day, someone told him that addictions can be a form of spiritual bondage, that there are negative forces that feed on such weaknesses and keep them alive. Desperate, he decided to try Psalm 35. He didn't have strong religious faith, but he was willing to try anything. He recited the psalm every day for 40 days, the traditional period of spiritual transformation. During the first few days, his craving for drugs was so strong that he could barely focus on the words. But he persisted. Around the 15th day, he had a vivid dream in which he saw dark entities surrounding him, fleeing as a bright light appeared. From that moment on, his craving began to fade. It wasn't instant and it wasn't easy, but by the end of the 40 days he felt that something had broken. For the first time in decades he felt true control over his choices. Years later, he remains clean and attributes his freedom to the power of Psalm 35, which he believes broke the spiritual bonds that sustained his addiction. Psalm 35 is also powerful against envy in the workplace. Many people experience career blocks not because they lack competence, but because they are targets of jealousy from coworkers or superiors. This envy can manifest as subtle sabotage, exclusion from opportunities, or an overall hostile atmosphere. A manager at a large company shared her experience. After receiving a major promotion, she began to notice that her projects were being sabotaged, that important information didn't reach her, and that there was a silent campaign to discredit her. She could sense the envy of some colleagues who believed they deserved the promotion. In addition to taking practical measures to protect herself professionally, she began reciting Psalm 35 every day before work, asking for protection against envious eyes and that any plot against her be revealed. Within a few weeks, the situation began to change. The co-workers who were sabotaging her were exposed through their own mistakes. One was caught altering documents. Another was fired for unethical behavior. She did not rejoice at their downfall but recognized that justice had been done. More importantly, she noticed that she had developed an inner confidence that made her less vulnerable to attacks. It was as if Psalm 35 had created not only a spiritual shield but also a psychological one around her. There are also reports of people using Psalm 35 to protect their homes and families. A family that had just moved into a new house began to experience strange phenomena. Objects would disappear and reappear in different places, there were unexplained noises, and everyone in the family began having nightmares. An elderly neighbor told them that the house had a history of conflict and that the previous family had moved out in a hurry after similar problems. The family decided to perform a complete spiritual cleansing of the house, and part of that ritual included reciting Psalm 35 in every room. The father, holding a white candle, walked through each space reciting the psalm aloud, asking that any negative presence or bondage connected to the house be broken and removed. The mother followed behind, sprinkling holy water. After completing the ritual throughout the house, the phenomena stopped completely. The family has lived there in peace ever since. The power of Psalm 35 is not limited to dramatic situations. It is also effective in protecting against the everyday negativity we all face. Hurtful comments, envious thoughts, heavy energies in certain environments, all these small spiritual aggressions can accumulate and affect our well-being. Reciting Psalm 35 regularly creates a shield against these influences. A therapist who worked with many clients daily reported that she began reciting Psalm 35 between sessions. She noticed that she was absorbing her clients' negative energies and bringing them home. After incorporating the practice of this psalm, she was able to maintain a healthy separation, helping her clients without being affected by their energies. It is essential to understand that Psalm 35 is not about wishing harm upon others but about asking for divine justice and protection. There is a crucial difference between vengeance and justice. Vengeance is personal, driven by anger and the desire to harm. Justice is about restoring balance, protecting the innocent, and allowing natural consequences to unfold. When you recite Psalm 35, you should do so with your heart focused on protection and justice, not on hatred or a desire for revenge. One story that illustrates this well involves a woman who was betrayed by her best friend. The friend had stolen her boyfriend and spread lies about her within their social circle. The woman was devastated and angry. Someone told her about Psalm 35 and she began to recite it, but her initial motivation was purely vengeful. She wanted bad things to happen to her former friend. Curiously, as she continued to recite the psalm, something began to change within her heart. The words of the psalm began to work not only externally but internally. She began to realize that her hatred was poisoning only herself. She continued praying the psalm, but now asking for justice to be done, for the truth to be revealed, and also for healing for her own pain and the ability to forgive. Over time, the truth about her ex-friend's character was exposed. Her ex-boyfriend's relationship ended badly, but the betrayed woman was at peace. She had been protected not only from external attacks but transformed within. Psalm 35 teaches us that true spiritual protection involves both external shielding and inner strengthening. When you are spiritually strong, centered in your faith and positive values, spells and bindings lose their power over you. It's as if you develop a robust spiritual immune system. There are complementary practices that can enhance the power of Psalm 35. Spiritual fasting, for example, is traditionally combined with powerful prayers. You can choose to fast from food, social media, negativity, anything that creates space for greater spiritual connection. During this fast, reciting Psalm 35 becomes even more powerful. Charity and acts of kindness also amplify the effectiveness of protective prayers. When you are asking for good to triumph over evil in your life, actively practicing goodness strengthens your spiritual position. It's a way of aligning your actions with your prayers. To conclude this deep reflection on Psalm 35, it's essential to understand that this sacred text is a powerful tool, but it is not magic. It requires faith, persistence, and a sincere heart. The results may be dramatic and immediate for some or come gradually for others. The important thing is to trust the process and remain faithful to the practice. If you are facing bindings, spells, envy, or any form of spiritual attack, Psalm 35 offers a path of protection and deliverance that has been tested by thousands of years and countless people. Start today. Read the psalm attentively with faith and expectation. Make it part of your spiritual routine. Allow its powerful words to work in your life, breaking invisible chains, creating shields of light, and restoring the justice and peace you deserve. Always remember, you are not alone in your battles. There is a higher power ready to fight for you, to protect you, and to restore everything that has been stolen or blocked in your life. Psalm 35 is a key that opens doors of protection and liberation. Use it with wisdom, use it with faith, and witness the transformations that will unfold in your life.